Hello, everybody. It's time for Laurie Live. You can go ahead and turn your cameras on if you'd like. I love to see everybody's faces. Pre-warning, I am sitting at a Starbucks today and my headphones are not working. So I'm outside, which should reduce some of the noise, but unfortunately not all of it, as I am near a busy road. But I'm really looking forward to today's discussion about documenting behavior in shelters and really looking forward to getting started. While we're waiting for a few more folks to join, who I think had mentioned that they were going to be, yep, here we got a couple coming in. Um, I just wanted to mention some cool updates as far as some things that I'm going to be working on this summer. So in July, I'm going to be teaming up with Dr. Karen Griffin again. She's a researcher in animal welfare, and we're going to be working on putting together some really awesome presentations that I'm dubbing the Lunch and Learn series. And our whole entire goal with doing these short 30 to 40-minute conversations about improving behavioral welfare in shelters is based on the idea that if we bundle them and sell them kind of as a whole bunch, what we can then do is have those played in shelter lunchrooms for staff and volunteers, on their lunch or break times. So these are going to be topics that are going to be not necessarily covered in most shelters when you're first onboarding. We're thinking about some niche topics. The first one we did on adoption counseling for families with children, and what are really important concepts and information to be giving to those who have children in the household when adopting a new dog. That one is already out and was kind of our preliminary. And so the series we're going to be putting together is going to be really talking a lot about some of those nuanced things that when you're onboarding as a shelter volunteer or employee, they're not really taught, but you learn through experience. And so teaming up with Karen is great because she brings the scientific research and backing to that. And I think that's really, really fun and awesome. And I'm hoping it's something everybody that follows me enjoys and also helps get more low cost information out to shelters so that they can train their staff, even if it's kind of happening in the background. So, really excited about that. But we're here today to talk about documenting observations and behavior and how it impacts everything about shelters and how we care for the animals. So if this is your first time here, I'm Laurie Lawless. I run shelter behavior integrations, and my whole goal is to help shelters improve behavioral welfare by integrating it into their overall operations. Because I truly feel like as when we're all working together as a team, we are improving animal welfare together and behavior welfare. Behavior isn't just a singular department. Behavior is happening all the time, and therefore all teams should be involved with everything regarding an animal, its welfare and behavior as they go through our shelter system. So a couple topics I wanted to cover today were starting with what types of behaviors are worth documenting, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we describe behavior when we're doing this documentation, and furthermore, tips for being objective, consistent, and useful. And then again, I apologize for the traffic, but we're going to be talking about getting how we're going to get the documentation into our computer system and in a legible format. So that way, when either internally we're deciding on the animal's pathway and or we're at the time of adoption and the adoption counselors need to know what needs to be explained to the adopters about the animal and what they should be prepared for in the home, we're ready and to rock and roll with that in a really clear and concise format. And then some really good real world examples of effective and then maybe not so effective ways that I have seen shelters implement these things. So, first, talking specifically to what behaviors are worth documenting. Anytime that we are looking at an animal coming into our care, documentation should realistically start from the moment at intake or previously. I've spoken on this topic a lot in many of my other conversations. But if we are getting animals coming in through an owner surrender or a transfer organization, it's incredibly helpful to start getting that documentation as early on in the process as possible. A lot of shelters that I work with still tend to use paperwork that might get filled out once the animal comes into the shelter. So, we have maybe the front desk staff who are scheduling intake appointments and getting some preliminary information, but we're not getting the full fleshed out idea of who this animal is or individual is until they are right in front of us in the room. One thing that's really important to note is oftentimes when folks are coming in to surrender their dog, it's a very emotional time for them. And many of them don't want to spend a lot of time lingering around and filling out paperwork. So they may fill it out a little bit more abruptly than they normally would, or they may just be looking to kind of fill in the dots. But what I want to see from a behavioral standpoint is who is this animal when the owner is in a much calmer and safe setting for them to give us the information. And when we approach this with a more open idea of we want to do what's best for your animal and help set them up for success in our shelter and their future home, typically what I have found is people are more willing to give more accurate and tangible data. So I highly recommend if you have a software system in your shelter that you are utilizing. So Shelter Love specifically has a really great way to create your intake forms right within the system and send that out as a link ahead of time. Other options might be something like a jot form or other form intake information. So you can send people this paperwork ahead of time. Not only in that way is it filled out in text online, so it's easier to transfer into the animal's file. But you don't have to ask the person to do it when they're under duress during a intake appointment. So obviously, we may not have this information if we're getting in stray animals and sometimes animal control intakes or potentially cruelty cases. But if the option is available, that type of documentation is there. So, what is it that's helpful to know for maybe this preliminary intake information? Is some of your basics. How does the dog respond to other dogs when you're on a walk? You want to kind of fluctuate a little bit between your yes and no's. So does this dog have a bite history? Yes. Okay, explain that. Right. But we also might want to ask them to paint us a little bit of a picture of how does it feel walking your dog down the street? What type of exercise needs do you think your dog would need? Are you currently meeting those needs or do you think they need more? So you're kind of really asking the owner for the individual pieces of what it looks like living with that animal in a household. If there's a concerning behavioral challenge, one of the things that I don't love to see is if you're does your dog resource guard, yes or no, right? I want to know and ask in a more human friendly state of how does your dog feel if you were to try to take something from them, right? Or what does it look like if you needed to take a toy from your dog's mouth, right? I want to know more specifically what that might look like. So that way we can kind of have an idea of what that dog's behaviorisms are with humans and their interactions with them. Same thing with children too. I usually want to make sure I'm asking not only have they lived with children, how are they with your children, but how are they with strange children? Same with people, same with dogs. It's totally normal for dogs to have really solid relationships with children in the house or other dogs in the household, but then introducing them to novel children or people or dogs, for them to have that different response. And so that can be really helpful to get that information. So as they move into the shelter, one of the first things that they're going to experience is a medical exam. Whether they just need their a check over, whether or not they need vaccinations, you're going to learn a lot about how an animal is handling a circumstance in which they're immediately put under something really stressful. So sometimes this happens right at the intake appointment in some shelters, and sometimes this happens within the first 24 to 48 hours. But regardless, those first 3 days in the shelter are going to be really stressful. And the medical team's experience from a behavior perspective, managing how they manage and are able to handle this animal is really beneficial because if we are seeing behavior that is concerning, it doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to be like that unless it's something really, really egregious. Like it's clearly this is the dog has been to the vet before and this is how they behave, which again is good information you can get on the intake form. So if you know this animal has had previous trauma from going to a vet office, we can plan for a fear free, low stress approach. However, if it's something we're finding out in the moment, it's something that we can flag and document. And then what we can do then is see if the animal, once they settle into the shelter, need to be evaluated by medical again. Is that a behavior similar to the first time, or now that they're settled in and have built relationships with staff members, has that behavior kind of decreased a little bit? And what that tells me is the animal has some resiliency, and also operates differently when they're not under a very stressful event. So, really good to get that documentation. So, for example, uh, in uh, two of the shelters that I've worked with, in part of the behavior evaluation, that initial vet intake exam is part of that initial evaluation. And, we don't want to ask too much time from the medical team because they're usually so busy. If I have to speak louder, just yell at me in the comments a little bit. Let's see. Hey, California. I didn't even open my comments thing. Yeah, if you guys need me to speak louder, let me know. There is a truck over here. Again, I apologize. My headphones not working. I can only do so much. So, I don't always want to ask medical teams, especially in a really high volume shelter, to have to do so much. So I might just have a section in that evaluation that is kind of a check mark for them. Or at the very least, one of the things that I've been utilizing so much more now that we have this tool is the FAS scale. So they can chart on a 0 to 5 whether or not the animal had a really hard time. And if we can't get flushed out details, that's okay. At least we know that if a dog scores a 4 or 5, somebody can follow up with the vet team at a later point in time and ask for more detailed information. So that information is really important, not only because it gives us a baseline, but it also allows us to see a potential trajectory as the animal settles into the shelter. So there's one point of behavior that kind of covers relationship to people, stress and handling, how they deal with it. Um, so that's really important. Then the next thing that I really like to do as far as documenting information is now how they're going to handle being moved in and out of their kennel, with people approaching the kennel, and how they do just interacting with people, right? So if you think about the four categories that are really important for people who are thinking about taking an animal, dog specifically, into their home, they're thinking about how will my relationship be with that animal? How will that dog's relationship be with other people or animals in my life? Uh, what is my relationship going to be with that animal around resources? And resources could include anything from a bone to a house, right? So safety, a house is a resource for an animal too. So if we see any type of territorial behavior, uh, we might be able to find that information out just from how they behave in their kennel versus outside of it, etc. Um, and what's the other thing? Oh, handling and restraint, right? If is this dog need to be groomed a lot? Are they going to have to go see a groomer? Do they have to go to the vet? Maybe it's an animal that has a lot of medical issues. Maybe it's just a dog who doesn't have medical issues, but we want to know exactly what that's going to look like if the owner wants to clip their nails, etc. So previously, we would do a lot of what I would like the standardized assessments, and I think there are portions of those assessments that are sometimes still valid if we don't have any information from an animal, like a stray, or we may want to have somebody do a couple of things just to solicit and see how their feelings are about them. But it is so much more impactful to get that information documented from the staff and the volunteers who are interacting with them on a daily basis. If we teach the staff and volunteers how to document their observations, that can be really impactful and powerful. So, one of the first things that I like to do is create um, like common language that we would use in describing body language and behavior. And I do actually have a chart of body language and behavior that I can upload here afterwards into the chat. But basically, we want to teach everybody how to use objective body language. And I also believe fear free, and certainly Maddie's fun, and I'm sure ASPCA Pro has some really short webinars in which you can have your staff watch and utilize. So part of it is going to be the staff training pieces on how they're documenting these observations, and we're going to ask specifically for what it is that we want information about. So for me, it's getting the dog out of the kennel, maybe putting equipment on, bringing the dog back into the kennel, taking equipment off. What I wanted to know is how do they walk on leash? Do they pull? Do they walk next to you? Do they like to be on a longer leash? Do they react to other dogs outside of the kennel environment? Are they scared? Do thresholds make them nervous? So I like to separate the getting in and out of the kennel and then the actual walk itself and those interactions. And then other things that we like to document are, do they do they engage in enrichment when it's handed out? Or do they not? Do they wait until people leave to eat their food, or do they eat it with people present? How are they when people are taking things out of their kennels? So maybe midway through the afternoon, somebody goes around and collects the Kongs. If they notice anything during that time, those are also important things to document. And the reason we want to document those things is because it does cover handling, it covers relationship to resources, it covers basically how they navigate the world when you're out and about. And all of that is giving us a really good snapshot of who that animal is. So I like for the first usually 3 to 5 days of that animal stay in the animal shelters that those things are documented each and every time there's an interaction, if we're able to do that. So how are we collecting that documentation? There is such a large variety of ways to do it. So for those types of interactions, I like to have some type of kennel sheet right onto the kennel. For this, I like to keep it very simple because typically people who are moving dogs are doing it in a way that is providing the animals with enough time outside of the kennel to enjoy themselves, but they also know they have to get to the next 5, 6, 7 dogs on their list, right? So these are the times where I might have a FAS score circle. um, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, circle the FAS score, and then just a short note section that just says observation. So, or how are they leashed? Easy, medium, difficult, right? So you can then document some of these things. And so we would have somebody, ideally, who would be collecting that documentation on maybe the dog's 5th day at the shelter and then entering that data into the computer, but also going through and saying, oh, well, like 4 different people had a really difficult time getting this dog out of the shelter. Therefore, what we need to do is make sure that we have a plan and have somebody with eyes with maybe some additional training or someone who can put a plan into place, take a look at the dog and identify what it is we need to do to help. Um, so that's something that I do really like to do for the initial 5 days because in that snapshot, what you're getting is the dog coming in and then decompressing and also settling into the shelter. I mean, by the end of week 1 to getting into week 2, this dog is now transitioning from being in a household, a stray on the street, or anything else, and this is now becoming where they live. So they need to learn how to adapt to the systems, and this is going to help us figure out how well the animal is adapting to what is going on around them in the shelter. And then from there, we can start to think about what type of in-shelter care that they need, and what other resources we can provide them, what type of marketing can we do for this specific animal, what type of home would be good for this specific animal, and all those other really awesome things that you'd want to discuss with your leadership teams. Really utilizing this opportunity, I got a fuzz in my face, using this opportunity to really capture who this animal is as they're decompressing. Are they settling in? Are they getting more anxious? Is this an animal we need to send to foster? That 5 day snapshot is going to give you a lot of information. And if 5 days is too much, even just the first 3 can be incredibly, incredibly helpful. So beyond that, what we then want to do is make sure that we're regularly monitoring the behavior of each individual animal throughout their stay. So for this, I actually like to use more of a, I guess, a regional board, clipboard. So this could be something that is put up in one kennel space. So if you have a couple different kennel rooms, each would have its own. This needs to be readily accessible to people. So if you have 40 animals and one concern or observation board that's in the kitchen and people have to stop what they're doing and go to the kitchen to do that, that is going to take them extra time and effort. You're less likely to see people utilizing that feature. One of the things that I've learned as a manager is you need especially when it comes to daily care staff and morning cleaning and things needing to get done quickly, it can't take more than like 2 to 3 steps, or folks are going to say, okay, I'll do that later and finish my task I'm doing right now. And then later comes and it's a shelter. So somebody walks in the door with like a cat they found, or they have to pivot to get on the phone call with an adopter who's having challenges, or somebody had diarrhea somewhere and they've got to go do a deep clean. So we need to make sure that that is accessible so they can stop what they're doing, jot a note down really quickly, and then return back to what they were doing. We don't want to lose those moment in time observations. And what I like to do is really stress to the volunteers and the staff how important those observations are. If we are waiting to identify behavior until it's very extreme, the likelihood that intervention is going to be beneficial, helpful, and applicable lessens each time. So, to build trust with the staff and volunteers that their feedback matters, it's really important that we're also going around and doing rounds, whether it's daily, every other day, at minimum twice a week, to go through, read through those observations and making sure that we're addressing them. So, on that observation area, whether it's a clipboard, with a list, or it's a whiteboard with a list, we want to make sure that we have an area to initial not only who had the concern, but also initial that the concern was addressed. And then I like to usually leave it there for a day or two so staff can see that the concern was actually looked at and somebody is working on addressing it. Different shelters will, and depending on their structure and teams and availability, sometimes we have shelters that will do rounds separately, different departments, right? So we have the medical team will go around and maybe do their own daily rounds. The behavior team might go around, if there is a behavior team, go around and look at daily rounds. And the sheltering manager, the kennel manager might go around and look at animals. I stress as much as you possibly can collaborate on timing those so you're doing it together, and talking about the animals together on the fly is a much more ideal position, because there's multiple reasons. One is, if it's a simple fix, you can do it on the fly and you can talk about it collaboratively right there and get it done. If it's more complicated, you can flag it for a parking lot. So you can say, this is actually requires a lot more than we have, right? You need to keep these rounds short and effective. Nobody wants to be doing rounds for 90 minutes, 2 hours. I've been there. Not fun. So if it's something that involves a bigger conversation, you can flag it and say, okay, well, we have our department, or we have our collaborative meeting on Friday. Let's talk about this animal then. In the meantime, one of us will implement some sort of like band-aid strategy. But the other reason that I think it's really important for shelter managers or leads or supervisors to do those rounds together is because then the staff and volunteers see you out there and be proactively addressing things. I always say but many shelters that I've been to, oftentimes the staff feel very disconnected from the management leadership team and say they're making all these decisions about animals and I never even see them walk a dog. I never see them out here cleaning. I never see them do this. This is a way for you to bridge that gap, because while you're out there on the floor doing your rounds, you can stop, especially if there's a question and the person who wrote the concern is right there. You can say, hey, can you come over here and tell me a little bit more about what you saw? And you're involving them in those conversations and you're acknowledging it. And they're feeling like they do have that say that a lot of staff and volunteers complain about not having. I think sometimes as managers, we get so bogged down in meetings and we have bigger picture projects we're working on and big tasks, but getting out there and talking one-on-one with your staff is so incredibly important. And the feedback that you'll get from your staff feeling more engaged is helpful, because not only do they feel like you care, but they understand the process of like how the bigger picture works. So something I really highly recommend. So then how do we document that information, right? So we're doing rounds. We decide, okay, this animal might need extra enrichment, or maybe this dog needs we need to make sure this specific dog is getting 2 walks a day and a bully stick, whatever your plan is. Or maybe we need to talk to medical about implementation of a behavior medication plan to go alongside their shelter stay. So when you get that information, what is really important is that that is then communicated out to all the other department heads or leads. And then that's also being filtered down to whoever is in charge of whichever department to their staff, right? So if it's like additional behavior meds, the med person can take that and tell their staff what needs to happen. But everybody else in the shelter is also in the loop that this dog is going to be starting behavior meds. And we want to track observations to see if those behavior meds are actually effectively targeting the behavior. So, one thing you can do is an email at the end of the day, like a recap. So a rounds recap would work really well, and that could go out to all the management. The way that I like to do it is the management kind of has a recap, and then each department does it. Decimates is not the right word. Not delegates either. Disseminates. Yeah, disseminates the information down to their own teams. And so other shelters may use something like a Slack channel. Microsoft Teams has some options, but you're really going to want something that's comes out once a day and is in a standardized format. So everybody knows that when those notes are posted, it is specifically those notes. And then just copy paste that into your the animal's individual files. So whichever software system you're currently using, you can do it right in there. If you're using specific softwares, excuse me, they may have a way to aggregate that data and send, and you can print out reports. But every shelter is going to be a little bit different in their size, what software systems they use and don't. Many of the smaller shelters that I work with, we just implement an email strategy because it's just easy to send a recap at the end of the day. Another version might be a live Google Doc, because if you do a Google Doc, then you could put like check marks. So when something is actually completed, it can be checked. So there's a variety of different ways that you can use technology to automate these systems. And one of the things I'm actually really loving about using features like ChatGPT is if you can take, let's say you have an observation board and it's got complaints with the or concerns or observations about a specific animal. Really important to note, you can put happy things on there too. Like happy observations are definitely really great to have in an animal's profile, especially for the adoption counselors. But I can snap a picture of the observation board, put it into Chat GBT and ask it to pull out all the text. And it's not just Chat GBT. There's multiple softwares that can do this now. And then you just copy paste. So you're not sitting there and having to type everything from a specific report. So when we are asking folks on those specific types of observations, what we're asking for is non-emergent behaviors or observations that we've seen. So these would be something like, I don't know, had a hard time walking Wally today because he saw a squirrel or something, or Jojo keeps flipping her Kuranda bed over. Is there something different we can use for her bedding? Or anything that is kind of noteworthy about the individual animals, I would say just behavior individualism. And it's important to note that when we do staff training, if there is an emergency or a potential, like I went to go remove somebody's leash and they growled at me or something of that nature, that should be reported immediately to a supervisor. And so that can be done either, via walkie-talkie, that can be done by using a behavior check system in one of your software programs, or just directly telling somebody. But that way that can be tackled immediately. And that way that is just handled, and we don't have something that gets put on the board that you see it 2 days later and you're like, "Oh my god. People have been handling this dog for the last 2 days. That's not good." So again, there's some staff training involved about the usage of it, but that's also really critical. So the other things that we want to make sure we're documenting in the shelter is any continued medical stuff, any behavior that is different or changing about the animal. We also want to make sure that if a dog is going out for outings or activities, we're getting some documentation about that, especially if it's offsite. All that information can be incredibly helpful to understand what it might look like for somebody who to adopt this animal and take them to the park, or riding in the car is a really big one. I mean, how many times have you gone to send a dog home and they go to put it in their car and it won't get in the car? You had no idea. stairs. So a lot of animals that come out of shelters may not know how to navigate stairs. So some of these things, whenever we're in the shelter, we should always be thinking about the home. That is always our goal. That is always where we want the animals to go. And so when you think about having an animal in your home, what are the things that are really important? When you take an animal into an office with you, do they get freaked out when the AC unit kicks on? Or maybe you have like a phone ringing and that startles them, right? Those are sounds that, yeah, maybe when they're in a home and they habituate to that environment, it might not be a big deal, but it's really important to note because if you see that this animal's come into the office a few times and after the fifth time is still startled by some of those noises, that might indicate that there's some more generalized anxiety, or under socialization or lack of exposure to those things. And we might be flooding the animal and we might need to change up the behavior strategy and or look for a adoptive home that knows that they can't take this dog immediately, to the park or walking down the busiest road in town if they might have some environmental sensitivities. So tracking those behaviors is really, really helpful. So when we are at the place where the animal goes up for adoption, we can compile all of those notes and really paint a thorough picture of who this is. And again, another thing AI for shelters is really helpful is summarizing stuff. Like I'm not asking, I think the more that I've been able to kind of use AI to help make my life more efficient, I don't want AI to replace people by any means, but it is a really helpful tool to say, "Hey, here's a big block of text. Can you summarize this for me?" And it's really, and then you just go in and edit the things that it's like, that's maybe relevant or not relevant, but it does a really good job for the most part, from my experience, using ChatGPT specifically, of really making a good summary and getting all the extra wordiness out there. So your adoption staff has that picture. So another thing that's very important to document, and I think that if you've heard me talk at all, play groups are so important, or play pairs or play dates, understanding how an animal interacts with other dogs is it like how does this dog interact with other dogs in the world? Do they have preferences? Do they love it? Are they tolerant of it? Are they kind of laissez-faire about it? Like they're happy to be around other animals, but they don't necessarily like to play with them. This is all good information, because most folks who have a dog have two. At least in Vermont where I am. I think it's, per household that has a dog, it's like a 1.7 ratio or some weird number, right? So we know that many people who have one dog usually have two. Um, and many people who have a dog want to be able to take the dog out and about, bring them to the brewery, have guests and friends over, have their family over that has pets, and it's really nice to be able to paint that picture for them, of what this dog may enjoy once they're out of the shelter environment and what they might be specific about not liking. So at least you can prepare adopters. I also personally learn a lot about dogs just in how they navigate the stress of playgroup, because whether they like playgroup or not, walking into a party full of new people is always a little stressful for me. I have to meet people, they have to get to know who I am. I need to ask them where they've worked or what they've done. There's a whole process there, right? And that's what dogs go through when they're meeting new dogs. They sniff each other, they learn about where those dogs have been, they know who they are, they understand what sex they are. And so understanding how they navigate those social currencies, I guess, and those social dynamics is very helpful to really get an idea of who they are. So for play groups, it gets a little bit more challenging. When you run play groups, you have multiple dogs in a group. So even if you're writing notes, that means you then have to enter notes into multiple dogs' profiles. Um, that can get very clunky and cumbersome. Sometimes I go to shelters and I ask to see how a dog does in play group, and they send and I get sent like 3 pages of play group notes, and I'm like, can you summarize maybe just what the dog's tolerance level is, sociability level, play group style, like how do they like to play? Um, just like a brief 2-sentence summary, and that is something that I think is very beneficial, for adoption counseling, because then you don't ever wanna say, "This dog loves going to the dog park," or anything like that, but you can say at the shelter, we have introduced this dog to our play groups. In playgroup, this dog gravitates towards dogs who like to play in such way. So when you're thinking about bringing this dog home, these are the types of dogs that she may enjoy playing with or interacting with and may not enjoy interacting with these dogs. So we would use cautions and introductions. So instead of leaving it up to ambiguous or saying, oh, his dog is selective, or that is one term I could circle back to later that I could talk about. The term selectivity is very off-putting for adopters, and we need to find a different way to say that my dog likes specific friends or certain friends, or likes dogs with this play style versus, oh, he's selective about who he likes. It's not a helpful term. But backtracking to what I was talking about, uh, one way that we can capture playgroup notes, I enjoy using like a Google spreadsheet. I found this to be the most useful across the board. Some shelter programs do have some ways of entering data for multiple dogs and it plugs them into each individual profile, but I find that very clunky and it's always not easy to set up within your software systems. But generally, I like to have a spreadsheet that has every dog in the shelter, and then we have categories that says their sociability level, their play style, age, sex, and then any more intricate kind of notes. I should have pulled it up. Let me see if I can find it really quickly so I can um, actually show it to you guys. There we go. Yeah, let me show you guys this really quick because I think, um, where's my little share button? There we go. Okay. So if you look here, oh, wrong thing here. So if we're looking here, this is just an example template. I think these are fake dog names. But what we can do is identify how often we might want the dog to go out to play group. So high meaning like as often as possible, daily, medium, maybe they go once a week or twice, or maybe they go two to three times a week. Low dogs might be, or kind of like, I like to hang out and play group, but it's not my favorite thing, dogs, but socialization is still good for them. You want to have their sex, so their age, their size is really helpful. And then yeah, their classification, social tolerant. There's that word selective, which I think is an okay word to use internally. I just don't like it used describing the dog to the public. Or maybe they're just like a play pair dog where they only have one or two friends and maybe play group just gets too over arousing for them and gets them in trouble. And then their play style. So these are just some names I've come up with. Like they're adaptable, they can go anywhere. Maybe they're shy, maybe they're super playful, maybe they like chasing and herding, maybe they're rough and rowdy. And then any specific attributes about that dog. So they're vocal, maybe they correct well or don't correct well. Maybe they're new to play group and so they're kind of just learning to navigate. Um, Maybe they only like females, will snap if dogs invade space. So this gives like a really nice overview snapshot. And not only can this be helpful for creating a summary for that dog's preferences, but your people who are running the play groups can also use this as a snapshot when they're trying to put their play groups together in the morning. And then, of course, if the dog is new, you might just have it blank here, or maybe you fill in, the sex, age, status, and then as they come into play group and get evaluated, then they add those classifications. The clunky thing about using an Excel spreadsheet or a um, Google Sheet spreadsheet is that somebody has to go in and update it constantly. So it's best if there's one or two people who are regularly updating this based on the notes that come back from the folks that are running the play groups themselves. So I'll stop sharing that. Oh, it's a loud truck. All right, bear with me while I get myself back together here. All right. And then yeah, so then I really think that the big takeaway from doing this documentation is really being able to have the objective data, have it being captured regularly, uh, And if we recognize that a dog doesn't have data updated regularly after that initial 5 days, then that means that maybe we can just do a round and go around and ask daily care staff or animal care staff, hey, I don't have that many updates from, Grover and Kennel 12. How's he doing on a regular basis? And just ask for those updates. And then the other piece of it that's very important, there's two. One is if you need to change that dog's in care plan. So if they're really having a hard time, maybe during morning cleaning, because the brooms and mops are scary, you can add that dog maybe gets like an extra bully stick or maybe a dental chew or something for them to do in the morning while the cleaning is happening. Or maybe they get a kennel cover specifically just during dog movement. Um, so that way it reduces some of the visual stimuli, but then that's removed at a different time. So you've got that in shelter care piece, but you're also, you know, gathering information about the dogs to just continue to monitor their quality of life. So we know that dogs after 2 weeks, they're basically settled into the shelter, and I like to try to move, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot, is moving away from saying that this is a homeless dog and recognizing that this shelter is currently now their home, right? And when you change your thinking of that way, we're thinking about, well, this is a dog in my home. What is the most effective thing I could do to make sure that they're not living in stress? And I think when you kind of rephrase this idea that we're living in a temporary environment and we're actually like, this is their home until they're not here anymore. I think it changes the way that we think about our care plans, and that we are tackling every day as a new day and making sure that we're doing our best to reduce stress at all times. So I think being able to track these observations also gives us a good way for our managers to then look at quality of life, because like in my after we hit like a 90-day mark, we're really hitting long-term stay. And then anything after 90 days, we're really looking at behavioral deterioration, habituation to an institutionalization. It's going to be harder and harder to reacclimate that dog back into a home environment. And of course, I'm like broad strokes here. There are some dogs that are wicked resilient and are like, yeah, whatever. I'll just go here. I go there. I go on a volunteer overnight, and it's just like I was in a home yesterday. But by and large, if we have dogs who are here for more than 3 months, we're thinking about how much harder it's going to be for them to reacclimate to a new schedule. Like, I know, especially as an adult, I don't like having to change my schedule around all the time. So if I've gotten really used to one thing and then I have to flip flop it, even if my welfare will be better in that situation, it's still a challenge, and it's still really challenging to make that transition and get rid of old habits and learn new ones. So, it's important that we're tracking the behavioral quality of life of the animal to make sure that they are still having a good quality of life in the shelter with us. And if they're not, how can we make adjustments to change that? Or what resources? Maybe we can get them out to extra foster weekends, or maybe we can get them to daycare locally. Like, sometimes I've seen shelters partner with local daycares who will take the animal once a week just to go to a daycare environment and meet new people and play with new dogs in a safe space. So yeah, so just different options that you can find from that. So I'm rounding up to the end of it here. So if anybody has any questions, I hope this was really helpful for you guys. I'm glad so many people came in and checked in on this one. Um, but yeah, I would love to see if there's any questions. I'm happy to take them. You can post them in the chat. Yes, okay, that's a good one. So subjective versus objective language and behavior observation. So we want to really help encourage our staff and volunteers. And this, again, it can just be some simple training in like a 30-minute webinar. What the difference looks like between stating something like, I took the dog to the park and they were reactive towards other dogs, right? I would rather have the volunteer or staff, right? I took the dog to the park, and when we approached a dog walking on a leash from about 50 feet away, I noticed he alerted and got really stiff. And as that dog continued to approach, he blunched and barked. And then I also want to know what they did to mitigate it, or if they were able to mitigate it. So we moved away to an area behind a bush, and the dog was able to calm down and take treats. That for me paints a picture, and I'm sure you can think of what that might look like versus I took a dog to a park and he was reactive to another dog, right? So we're really asking to when we're taking these observations is throwing the labels out the door and asking to paint the picture. And I think that that's just the best way to say it, is asking people to, what did that look like, is really the most important thing, because it leaves a lot less room for subjective interpretation. I'm doing a whole course right now with Jessica Wheatcraft on unpacking reactivity, because I have seen that label utilized, just like the word selective, utilized both in sheltering and in my private training consulting. And when somebody tells me their dog is reactive, to me, that could mean 100 different things. I want to know what it looks like, because that's, if I know what it looks like, I can identify what might be causing the reactivity. And then I can address how we're going to go about to help that dog be less stressed and change the behavior, or change the environment so the dog doesn't need to express that type of behavior to feel safe or comfortable. So that's a really good question. And like I said, there's some courses. ASPCA Pro and Maddie's Fund has a really, has, both of them have good courses on the objective language. And so I can definitely look into that. I have to go to a doctor's appointment right after this, but I can certainly post as soon as I get back to my house later. I'll update the Facebook page, Facebook group with some resources. I have time for one more question, and then I will have to skedaddle. But if this is a topic you guys want to hear more about, I can certainly do another live. Cat friendliness, and even if there is, the testing in shelters is not always a good indicator. Cats are really hard in a shelter. Thanks for asking that question. I divert typically a lot to dogs, but with cats, it can be challenging. And if we have a cat who's very shut down, I often like to see if we can find a way for that cat to be in a bigger space, have more hiding options, have more perching options, trying a variety of different types of enrichment and seeing if there's any type of motivation that will let the cat come out. Do they enjoy the enrichment? How do they engage with it? Do they like visual stimuli? Is there anything that will get them to move and consider coming out of the corner? Um, I think a lot of times with cats who are fearful and shut down, it it's a matter of making them feel safe. As I mean, this goes for dogs too. Dogs are just more outwardly in how they express their stress. Cats, we really need to take time. And if I had any wish in the world for cats, it would be that we are double or tripling the size of their enclosures, because they do not do well in small confined spaces. They like to be able to move away. They are a prey species as much as they are predators, and their instinct to feel safe is very strong. They're way less less domesticated than dogs in that way. Oh, determining if a dog is cat friendly. Sorry, confusing. Yeah, so that's good. So I do not advocate for dog and cat testing in a shelter. I believe that it's generally not accurate. I feel like it's really w- we shouldn't be doing anything that's going to add additional stress to a cat in a shelter. I think that, putting a cat in a cage or walking a dog through a cat room can be incredibly stressful. And there just isn't data to show. And I personally have the experience of knowing that it's just not necessarily helpful, because cats are all individuals just like dogs. So some cats will run, some cats will fight, some cats will hide, some cats will perch, some cats will just swat the dog in the face. And for most dogs, unless it's a prey drive or a predatory behavior towards cats where they want to eat it, um, we can have a really wide variety of behavior from the dog, because all dogs also have a very wide variety of that predatory sequence that's intact or not intact. So like border collies or herding dogs have like the chasing and nipping, but not the bite, not necessarily like the grabbing and consuming part, right? Or we have other dogs who are see a movement and they think food, and then we have other dogs who are like, oh, it's a cat. So it's really hard to also just, if you have a negative, you might end up with like a false negative in the shelter as well, because let's say they saw a cat in a cage and it was in close proximity and they're like, oh, what is that? And they go for it. The cat might get scared and we might just say, oh, this dog can't live with cats, but that might not necessarily be true. The only time where I think that might be true, I think we can base it more on, um, if we don't have history, is letting adopters know this dog has, like, we don't know if this dog's living with another cat. Here's how to set your dog up for success with a cat. Maybe let's do a foster to adopt. If you see anything really concerning, bring the dog back to us or call us. And I think that that's really the best way to go for that. So I hope that that was helpful. I want to bring Karen back onto one of my lawless off leash series to talk about that. All right, well, I gotta skedaddle to this doctor's appointment, which is a super bummer, which is why I'm at a Starbucks right now instead of my house. But thank you all for joining today. If you love this topic, please feel free to let me know and I can do another one and we can go more into specifics. If you guys have live ideas, definitely let me know because I'm running out of ideas and I think I am doing this for you guys. So if there's like niche topics you want to dive into, I'm all for that as well. So please just go ahead and post in the Facebook group, shoot me a message. That's cool. And I will not be here next week because I'm actually going on a vacation, which is fun for my birthday, and I will come back with more tattoos. So I'll definitely show you guys those. One of them is going to be my dog Boo that passed last year. So those are my personal fun updates, but I'll catch you the week following. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week and I'll touch base soon and please let me know, give me feedback. Thank you. My birthday, I'm getting old. Don't even want to say it. Talk to you later, guys. Bye.